Don't let her leave the floor. The words came from Alpha King Alden Mercer in a voice so calm it made the entire ballroom go still. Clara Whitman was halfway through a polite turn with Theo Langford when she felt it. That strange, electric tug under her ribs, like something inside her had just heard a name it had been waiting for. She almost missed a step. Theo noticed. "You okay?" he asked softly, guiding her hand back into place. Clara forced a small smile. "Fine." That was a lie, but it was the kind people expected from an Omega at a royal gala. The ballroom at Blackstone Hall glittered under chandeliers and old money, with silver trays, polished marble, and enough perfume in the air to give a person a headache. Every eye in the room seemed to find her at once, then dismiss her just as fast. She was the daughter of a minor pack clerk, a guest by invitation, useful only because she knew how to read ceremonial notes and keep her head down. That was supposed to be the whole story. Then Alden spoke again, not louder, just sharper. "I said, don't let her leave the floor." Clara looked up. Across the room, the Alpha King stood at the edge of the elevated dais, tall and impossible in a dark tailored suit, his expression carved from ice and obligation. He was not looking at Theo. He was looking at her. And beneath the polished stillness of his face, something in him had clearly moved. Clara could feel it before she understood it. A pull, faint but real, like a thread stretching between her chest and his. Mate bond. The thought landed with enough force to make her breath catch. No, she told herself immediately. Not here. Not in front of this many people. Not in front of him. Theo slowed his steps, reading her reaction in the way decent men did when they realized something bigger than themselves had just walked into the room. "Clara," he said, careful now. She could not answer, because Alden's wolf had surfaced just enough to make the silence feel alive. It was not a sound everyone heard. It was not even a sound at all, not exactly. It was a pressure, a presence, an animal certainty with a voice only she seemed to catch in the noise of the music. "Stay?" Clara went cold. Not because the word was harsh, because it sounded furious, possessive, afraid. Around them, the pack had begun to notice. A few women looked away too quickly. One councilman lifted his glass and pretended not to stare. Vivian Sloane, dressed in pale gold and confidence, wore a smile that did not reach her eyes. She had been waiting for something like this. Clara saw it instantly. Alden descended one step from the dais. Just one. That was all it took to shift the entire room. "Miss Whitman," he said, and now every syllable carried the weight of a command. "Dance with me." The invitation should have sounded graceful. Instead, it felt like a warning. Theo's hand loosened from hers, not unkindly, just enough to give her the choice. Clara looked at Alden, at the way his jaw flexed once before he controlled it, at the steady hands that were probably used to signing laws and giving orders and carrying a whole kingdom on his back. Then she looked at the pack around them, all watching to see whether an Omega would bow her head or break the room open instead. Clara lifted her chin. "That," she said quietly, "sounds like a problem for both of us." The music did not stop. That was the strange part. The string section kept playing as if nobody in the room had just watched the Alpha King single out an Omega in front of half the northern pack. Clara felt every gaze turned toward her, then away, then back again, like the entire ballroom had become unsure of its own manners. Theo gave her hand one last gentle squeeze and stepped aside. "I think," he said in a low voice, "you are about to have a very long night." Clara almost laughed, but the knot under her ribs tightened before she could answer. Alden was already waiting at the edge of the dance floor, one hand extended, his expression unreadable and far too controlled for a man who had just changed the temperature of the room by a single sentence. She placed her fingers in his. The moment he touched her, the pull hit again, stronger this time. Not pain. Not exactly. More like her body had recognized a truth her mind had not agreed to yet. Alden's eyes flickered, just for a second, and she saw it there too. That same flash of recognition he was trying hard to bury. "You should not have done that in front of everyone," Clara said as he guided her into the first step. "And you should not sound so calm about it," he replied. His voice stayed level, but his hand at her waist was careful in a way that felt almost personal. "I am very aware of how this looks." "Then why do it?" He looked past her shoulder for one beat, toward the watchful pack, toward the council members pretending not to watch, toward Vivian Sloane's sharp little smile. "Because letting that room believe I did not care would have been worse." Clara searched his face, but Alden had already locked it back behind royal discipline. The dance carried them in a slow circle beneath the chandeliers. Around them, the crowd pretended to keep talking. No one was really talking. A woman near the far wall whispered something behind her fan. A man in a gray suit stared so hard he forgot to blink. Clara kept her chin up, even as heat climbed up her neck. "You realize," she said, "this is the kind of thing that gets people talking." People were already talking. "About me. About us," he said, and the word came out so quietly that it almost disappeared into the music. Clara missed a step. Not badly, but enough for him to notice. His hand steadied her without hesitation, and she felt it again, that quick, startling pull beneath the skin, like an invisible cord had tightened between them. Alden noticed it too. His jaw flexed once. Clara lowered her voice. "You felt that, did you not?" He did not answer immediately. For one suspended second, the Alpha King looked less like a ruler and more like a man standing at the edge of something he had spent years refusing to name. "Yes," he said finally. "I felt it." Before Clara could reply, a sharp voice cut across the edge of the music. "How touching." Vivian Sloane stood near the edge of the floor, one hand resting lightly on her glass, her smile perfectly arranged. "I had no idea the king favored public surprises." The room went still again, waiting. Clara felt Alden's wolf stir beneath the surface, not in anger exactly, but in a low, dangerous warning. This time she heard it clearly. The rough thought pressed against the inside of her mind like a growl held back by teeth. "Mine." Clara froze. Alden's hand tightened just enough to remind her he had heard something too, or at least sensed her reaction. Vivian's eyes narrowed, hungry for a crack in the royal facade. "Your Majesty," she said sweetly, "should we inform the council that the evening has become more interesting than planned?" Alden did not look at Vivian. He kept his eyes on Clara. "No," he said. "We should finish the dance." And as he led Clara through the next step, with the whole pack watching, she understood the real problem. The king had not simply chosen her. Something inside him had already decided she mattered. When the dance ended, nobody moved for a second. The music kept playing, but the room had changed. Clara could feel it in the air, in the way the servants lowered their eyes, in the way the council members straightened their jackets like they were trying to remember which side of the kingdom they belonged on. Alden released her hand only after leading her away from the center of the floor, through a narrow archway lined with old gold mirrors and winter roses. The moment they were out of sight of the ballroom, Clara let out a slow breath she had not realized she was holding. "You cannot just do that," she said. Alden stopped beside a window overlooking the frozen courtyard. Moonlight laid a pale stripe across his face, and for the first time that night, he looked less like a king and more like a man who had made a choice too quickly to take back. "I know," he said, "but I did it anyway." Clara folded her arms, partly to steady herself, partly because her body still had not forgiven her for the pull she felt every time he touched her. "You have the entire pack staring at me like I walked in carrying a bomb. They were staring before I asked you to dance. That is not making me feel better." A flicker of something almost like a smile touched his mouth, then vanished. Before Clara could answer, footsteps approached from behind them. Marcus Bell, Alden's beta, appeared in the doorway with the tired look of a man who had spent years cleaning up royal disasters before they became official. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "the council is asking whether they should read this as a personal matter or a political one." Alden did not turn. "Tell them neither." Marcus gave Clara a quick glance, not unkind, but measured. That was the first sign that the room outside had already decided she mattered more than she should. "That will be difficult," he said. "Lady Vivian is already making it sound like the king has forgotten his duties." Clara heard the name and felt Alden's posture tighten. He had gone still in the way powerful men did when they were trying not to react in public. "She is speaking too much," he said. "She always is," Marcus replied. "The problem is that half the hall listens." Clara looked between them, slowly understanding. This was not only about a dance. It was about rank, about who was allowed near the king, about what an Omega like her was supposed to be in a room full of old bloodlines and careful alliances. A faint pressure touched her chest again, soft but unmistakable. She looked up. Alden was watching her, and beneath his controlled expression, something in his wolf was awake and restless. Not wild, not dangerous, just there, like a truth he had not been given permission to say. You felt it too, Clara said quietly. He did not answer. Marcus did. If you mean the bond. Yes, everybody with a pulse noticed something. Alden shot him a warning look. Marcus ignored it with the calm of a man who had survived enough kings to stop fearing them. The council will want clarity, he continued. They will want to know whether this is a formal mate response or a distraction. Clara's stomach dropped. There it was. The word that changed everything. Mate. Not rumor. Not gossip. Not a ballroom mistake. A real thing the pack would measure, classify, and try to control. Alden finally spoke, his voice low and steady. No one is to approach Miss Whitman without my permission. The order landed hard. Clara felt it in the silence that followed, in the way Marcus nodded once and immediately understood the line had been drawn. Alden looked at her then, and his expression had gone very still, almost careful. I am not asking the pack to trust this yet, he said. I am asking them to leave you alone long enough for me to figure out why it is already true. Clara should have been angry. Instead, she felt something sharper and stranger. Not safety. Not exactly. But the beginning of being seen. Outside the hall, Vivian was still talking. Inside, the king had just put his authority between Clara and the rest of the room. And somewhere under all of it, hidden beneath the rules and the title and the old fear, the bond between them pulled one quiet step closer. The next morning, Clara expected the palace to pretend the night before had never happened. Instead, it acted like the whole building had taken a deep breath and decided to wait for the next mistake. The hallways were quieter. The guards watched her more carefully. Even the servants seemed to move with the strange politeness people used around a storm cloud. By noon, Marcus Bell found her outside the East Conservatory, where she had been sent to sort linen orders that had nothing to do with royal strategy and everything to do with keeping her occupied. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, and gave her the kind of look that said he had already answered 3 difficult questions before breakfast. His Majesty wants to see you, he said. Clara did not look up from the stack of folded tablecloths. Does he? Yes. Is that an order or an invitation? Marcus almost smiled. Around here, those are often the same thing. Clara finally met his eyes. I thought the council wanted me kept away from him. The council wants a lot of things. He lowered his voice. The king wants to speak with you before they turned last night into a political argument with silverware. Clara should have refused. She knew that. She also knew refusing would only make her look guilty to people who already wanted a reason. So she followed Marcus through 2 marble corridors, past a wall of ancestral portraits, and into one of the smaller private sitting rooms near the royal wing. Alden was there alone, standing by the fire with his hands behind his back, dressed in a dark coat that made him look even more unreadable than usual. But this time, when Clara stepped inside, his wolf was the first thing she noticed. Not because she saw it, because she heard it. You came back, the voice said, low and rough in the edge of her mind, as if it had been pacing for hours. Clara stopped short. Her pulse skipped. Alden looked at her immediately. What is it? He asked. Clara blinked once. Nothing. The wolf let out something between a sigh and a bitter laugh. She heard me. Alden's eyes sharpened. Marcus, who had started to leave, stopped with one hand on the doorframe. He said what? Clara stared at the king. Your wolf. Alden's jaw tightened. What about him? He just spoke to me. Silence fell so fast it felt physical. Marcus slowly closed the door behind him, then turned back with the expression of a man realizing his afternoon had become someone else's crisis. That is new, he said. Very. Alden did not move. Say exactly what he said. Clara looked from one man to the other. He said, you came back. The fire cracked softly. Alden looked almost annoyed, but underneath it there was something else. Something close to alarm. He has never done that before, Marcus muttered. Clara folded her arms, trying to keep her breathing steady. Then why is he doing it now? Alden did not answer right away. He crossed the room, not too close, stopping just far enough away to give her room to breathe. Because he is not the only one who can feel this, he said quietly. Clara felt the pull again, low and bright under her ribs. It was not loud. It did not need to be. It was the kind of thing that changed the shape of a room without anyone announcing it. Marcus looked between them, then cleared his throat. I hate to interrupt whatever the kingdom is doing to itself, he said. But the council is requesting a briefing. They think last night may have triggered a formal mate response. Clara almost laughed at how clinical that sounded compared to the way her chest had been tightening every time Alden looked at her. Alden's face went cold in the polite, royal way it did when he was trying not to give anything away. Tell them to wait. Marcus exhaled through his nose. They will not like that. They do not have to like it. Clara looked at Alden, then at the fire, then back at him. For the first time since the ballroom, she understood something important. This was not just attraction, not just gossip. The bond was alive, and Alden knew it was real enough to scare him. So what happens now? She asked. Alden held her gaze, and his voice came out lower than before. Now, he said, we find out why my wolf trusts you before I do. The briefing never happened that afternoon, or at least, not the way the council wanted it to. By the time Clara and Alden reached the western study, the room already felt tense enough to snap. A tray of untouched tea sat near the window. Marcus Bell stood by the door with the patience of a man who had accepted that his entire life was now a series of interruptions. Alden did not sit. He never seemed to when he was worried. Clara noticed that right away. He moved to the fireplace, then to the desk, then back to the fireplace again, like standing still would admit something he was not ready to name. The council thinks this is a formal mate response, Marcus said, glancing between them. They also think the moon is a useful witness, so take that for what it is worth. Clara almost smiled. Alden did not. Tell them nothing until I say so. That will only make them worse, Marcus replied. They are already terrible. Clara folded her hands in front of her and looked at the king. You keep saying that like you are buying time. Alden finally faced her. I am. The answer was blunt enough to be honest. For what? He was quiet for a second too long. Then, very carefully, he said, for the truth. Marcus muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer and a complaint at the same time. Clara looked from one man to the other. You both keep talking about this like it is a legal document. Alden's mouth twitched, but the expression never fully became a smile. It is not a document. Then what is it? He did not answer right away. Instead, he came to a stop in front of the desk and picked up a silver paperweight, rolled it once in his hand, and set it back down exactly where it had been. Clara recognized the movement now. He did it when he was trying not to say something too personal. My wolf trusts you, he said at last. I am still deciding what that means. Clara held his gaze. That is a very kingly way to say you are confused. That is a very Clara Whitman way to notice. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, as if he could already hear the paperwork forming. Before Clara could answer, Alden's wolf spoke again. Only this time it was stronger. Not loud, just clear enough that it made the air between them feel charged. She is safe. Clara stared. Alden went still. Marcus slowly turned his head toward the ceiling, as if looking for mercy there. I did not say that, Alden said. No, Clara replied. He did. The wolf did not sound embarrassed. It sounded certain. Alden dragged one hand down the side of his face. This is becoming a problem. For who? Clara asked. For my reputation, he said. For your reputation, Marcus added. Clara looked at both of them. That seems like an issue for people who care too much about appearances. Alden's eyes held hers. In this room, that would be everyone. The silence after that was different. Smaller. More intimate. Clara could feel the pull beneath her skin again, but this time it did not feel like a shock. It felt like pressure building behind a locked door. Alden stepped closer, just enough for her to notice the clean scent of cedar and cold air around him. Clara, he said, and using her name felt more dangerous than any command. If this bond is real, then the pack will not treat you as a guest for long. She did not look away. And if it is not real, Alden's voice dropped. Then my wolf is the most inconvenient liar in the kingdom. Despite herself, Clara laughed softly. Alden looked almost startled by the sound, like he had not expected her to make room for humor in the middle of all this. Marcus, seeing that he had become unnecessary for once, opened the door. I will tell the council you are still being deeply royal and emotionally unavailable, he said. That should hold them for 10 minutes. After he left, the room became very quiet. Clara and Alden stood on opposite sides of the desk, the fire between them low and steady. You still have not answered me, Clara said. What truth are you buying time for? Alden looked at her for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. The one that says I may have known you were mine before I allowed myself to admit it. Clara had barely made it back to the east corridor when the first rumor hit the palace like a dropped tray. By dinner, half the pack had already decided that the Alpha King was either losing control of his wolf or falling into something far worse, depending on who was talking. Clara heard pieces of it as she walked past the service hall. He said her name in front of everyone. No, the wolf did. That is not better. It is somehow worse. She kept her face steady and her hands folded, but inside her chest, the bond was still humming like a live wire. Alden had not called for her again, not directly. That almost made it harder. Almost. Because now every time she thought about him, she remembered the way his voice had changed when he admitted he might have known she was his before he allowed himself to say it. She had not told anyone that part. She was not even sure she had fully accepted it herself. Then Vivian Sloane found her near the conservatory stairs. Vivian looked perfect in soft gray silk, which made Clara suspect she had dressed for battle and chosen elegance as camouflage. You have become quite a story, Vivian said. Clara kept walking. Stories are easier when people do not know the truth. Vivian fell into step beside her, matching her pace with polished ease. And do you know the truth, Clara? Clara stopped. I know you are not here by accident. Vivian's smile did not move. No one is. That was when Clara understood this was not just jealousy. Vivian was testing the edge of her, trying to see whether she would bow, flinch, or panic. Clara did none of those things. If you came to threaten me, she said, you should have tried harder. Vivian's eyes sharpened, then flicked briefly toward the end of the hall, where a pair of guards stood watch near the council wing. You should be careful, she said. Pack politics does not reward women who confuse attention with importance. Clara's stomach tightened, but her voice stayed even. And it does not reward women who mistake cruelty for status. Vivian's smile vanished for half a second. That was enough. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly against the marble. Clara kept moving until she reached the small side gallery that overlooked the inner courtyard. There, away from the noise, she finally let herself breathe. The wolf spoke before she expected it. She lies badly. Clara looked up, startled, then almost laughed from sheer disbelief. You cannot just do that every time I start to relax. I did not ask your permission. The wolf's voice carried that same rough edge, but there was less tension in it now. More certainty. More possession, though not in a cruel way. Clara rested one hand against the window frame. What does that make you, then? She murmured. Helpful, the wolf answered. Annoying, Alden said at the same time from behind her. Clara turned. He stood in the doorway to the gallery, coat unbuttoned, his expression composed in the way only very disciplined men could manage when they were one bad sentence away from losing it. He had clearly been looking for her. Marcus was not with him this time. That meant this was personal. Alden stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. The council is no longer calling this a rumor, he said. They are calling it a possibility. That sounds worse. It is worse. Clara studied him. And Vivian? Vivian thinks if she keeps pushing, she will force the pack to choose a side. His jaw tightened. She is not wrong about that part. Clara waited. Alden exhaled once, slow and controlled. There is a meeting tonight. Private council. No audience. No press. No excuses. And you want me there. It was not a question. He looked at her for a long second before answering. I need you there. The words were simple. The effect was not. Clara felt them settle low in her chest, like something irreversible. Because of the bond? Alden's gaze held hers. Because you are the only one in this palace who hears what my wolf is trying to tell me before I make the mistake of ignoring him. Clara swallowed. That sounds almost like trust. Do not get used to it, he said. But there was the faintest trace of dry humor in his voice now, enough to make the tension between them feel human. Then, quieter. Tonight, they will ask questions I cannot answer cleanly. If you are there, I may not have to answer alone. Clara understood what he was really asking. Not for loyalty. Not yet. For presence. For witness. For the kind of help that mattered most when a kingdom began turning a private truth into public business. She looked at the king standing in the doorway, all cold restraint and hidden strain, and then she nodded once. All right, she said. But if your wolf starts talking in front of the council, that is your problem. For the first time since the ballroom, Alden almost smiled. The private council room felt colder than the rest of the palace, even with the fire burning low in the stone hearth. Clara noticed it the second she stepped inside behind Alden, because every person at the table had already decided to look at her as if she had walked into a courtroom by accident. Marcus Bell stood near the wall with a folder tucked under one arm. Vivian Sloane sat with one leg crossed over the other, perfectly composed, like she had spent the entire day preparing to be offended on purpose. Two council elders were already waiting, along with a pair of pack advisors who looked more interested in control than truth. Alden did not sit. He stood at the head of the table, shoulders squared, expression calm in the way storms are calm right before they break something. Clara kept her own face unreadable and took the empty chair he had quietly left beside him. That small gesture did not escape anyone. "We are here," Alden said, "because I am tired of hearing my name discussed like it belongs to a rumor." No one spoke at first. Then Elder Harlan leaned forward and folded his hands. "Your Majesty, the pack has noticed a disturbance." "You mean Clara?" Vivian said smoothly. Alden did not look at her. "I mean the bond," Harlan replied. Clara felt the word hit the room like a dropped glass. "If it is real, the council has a responsibility to know whether it affects the throne." Marcus muttered, "Of course that is where we landed." Clara kept her eyes on the table. She could feel Alden beside her, steady and tense at once, like he was holding himself still by force. Then his wolf spoke, clear enough for her to hear, rough enough to make her spine go straight. "They are lying to you." Clara looked up so fast that Vivian noticed. Alden noticed that too. His eyes flicked toward her for a split second, asking without asking. Clara gave the smallest nod. Marcus exhaled through his nose. "Excellent," he said quietly. "Now we have reached the part where the king is being haunted by his own instincts in front of 6 political adults." Vivian tilted her head. "Did you hear something, Clara?" Clara did not answer her. She looked directly at Alden. "Your wolf thinks somebody is lying." The room went completely still. One of the advisors frowned. Harlan frowned harder. Alden's jaw tightened, not because he was angry, but because he knew exactly what that meant. "What exactly did he say?" he asked. Clara hesitated only a second before answering. "He said they are lying to you." That was all it took. Alden's gaze shifted from Clara to the council members, and the air in the room changed. Not louder, sharper. "About what?" he asked. Vivian folded her hands with deliberate grace. "About whether the bond is simply reacting to proximity or whether Miss Whitman is influencing your wolf for personal advantage." Clara laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Personal advantage? You are an Omega from the outer district," Vivian said. "You entered this palace with no standing, no title, and now you are at the center of a royal problem. People will ask questions." "People always ask questions when they want to sound important," Clara said. Alden glanced at her, and for the first time that night, she saw something almost like respect move across his face. Marcus opened the folder in his hands. "The administrative issue is not Clara," he said. "The issue is that the bond is reacting stronger when she is present. We have 3 witnesses, including a chamber guard and a servant from the West Hall, both of whom reported the king's wolf becoming agitated before Miss Whitman entered the ballroom." Clara froze. Alden turned his head slowly toward Marcus. "You did not mention that." "You did not ask," Marcus said. "I thought we were all enjoying the tension." The council did not, but Clara did, just enough to breathe. Alden pushed one hand against the back of his chair and looked directly at the elders. "Here is what you are going to understand," he said, voice quiet and exact. "No one will corner her, question her privately, or use her rank against her while I am standing in this room." Vivian's expression sharpened. "And if the bond is not accepted by the pack?" Alden looked at Clara before he answered. "Then the pack will learn the difference between accepting a truth and surviving one." Clara felt that sentence settle deep in her chest. It was not a confession. Not yet. But it was close enough to feel dangerous. When the meeting finally broke apart, no one looked satisfied. That was how Clara knew the night had not ended. It had only begun. By the time the public hearing started, the whole palace had already learned how to pretend it was not listening. Clara could feel it in the corridors on the way to the grand hall, in the stiff way servants lowered their heads, in the way guards stood a little straighter than usual, as if posture alone could keep a kingdom from gossiping. The council had invited observers. That meant they wanted witnesses. That also meant they wanted pressure. Clara walked beside Alden through the center aisle of the hall and tried not to look at the rows of nobles, pack elders, and staff packed along the walls. Vivian Sloane was already there in pearl gray, seated with perfect calm beside Elder Harlan, as if she had been born into the right to ruin other people's afternoons. Marcus Bell stood near the front, arms folded, wearing the expression of a man prepared to dislike every sentence that followed. Alden stopped at the raised platform, then turned slightly so Clara could stand beside him instead of behind him. That small choice did more than a speech ever could. "We are not here," he said, "to entertain suspicion." His voice carried easily through the hall. "We are here because this pack has confused fear with wisdom." A murmur moved through the room. Clara kept her hands still at her sides. She could feel the bond again, steady but awake, like a wire humming under the floorboards. Vivian rose with smooth, deliberate grace. "With respect, Your Majesty, no one is confusing anything. Your wolf has reacted to Miss Whitman in a way that is not normal." Alden did not blink. "Nothing about this situation is normal." "Exactly," Vivian said, "which is why the council has every right to know whether she is provoking the response on purpose." Clara heard a small sound from the edge of the platform. Alden's wolf. Not a growl. Not yet. More like a warning that had teeth behind it. Then, clear as a bell only she could hear, it spoke into her mind. "She is trying to separate us." Clara looked up at Alden. He was still facing the room, but his shoulders had tightened by a fraction. He knew. He could not hear the words, but he could feel her reaction to them. "Your wolf says you are trying to separate us," Clara said, and the hall went instantly quiet. Vivian's smile did not move, but something in her eyes sharpened. "How convenient," she said. "Now the Omega speaks for the king's instincts." Marcus let out a short breath that might have been a laugh if the situation had been less terrible. Alden lifted one hand, and the room fell silent again. "No," he said. "She speaks because she is the only one here telling the truth." Elder Harlan leaned forward. "Then tell us the truth, Your Majesty. Is this a mate bond or not?" The question landed like a blade without being sharp enough to spill anything. Clara's throat tightened. Alden stood still for a second that felt too long. Around them, the whole hall seemed to hold its breath. Then his wolf spoke again, not to the room, not even really to Alden. To her. "Tell them." Clara stared at the front of the hall. Her pulse was so loud she could hear it in her ears. "What did he say?" Vivian asked, almost hungry now. Clara met Alden's eyes. For one moment, he looked like a man standing at the edge of a decision that could not be taken back. Then he gave the smallest nod. Not permission. Trust. So Clara spoke. He said, "Tell them." A wave of whispers swept the hall. Alden turned toward the council, and when he finally answered, his voice was low, controlled, and impossible to mistake. "Yes," he said. "It is a mate response. And no, I will not let this room turn that into an accusation against her." The silence after that was brutal. Clara felt it move through the hall like cold air. Vivian looked at the king as if he had just ruined a plan she had been polishing for weeks. Elder Harlan's face tightened. Marcus, for once, looked almost relieved. Alden stepped half a pace forward, placing himself squarely between Clara and every person in the room who thought they had the right to judge her. "If this bond changes the way I rule," he said, "then it will change because I choose to rule with honesty, not because I was too afraid to name what is already true." Clara stood in the open, heart racing, while the entire pack stared at her differently than they had the night before. And somewhere deep inside the silence, she understood that the king had just turned a private bond into a public war. The silence in the grand hall lasted long enough to hurt. Clara could feel every eye on her, but for the first time, none of them felt heavier than her own spine. Alden stood beside her with his hand at his side, not touching, not protecting in the ordinary way people meant it, but standing there anyway, like a promise he had finally decided to make in public. Elder Harlan looked as though he wanted to argue, but the room had already shifted. The pack had heard the truth. Not a rumor, not a hint. The truth. Vivian Sloane was the first to recover her voice. "Then you are admitting," she said, each word sharpened to look polite, "that a lower-ranked Omega has disrupted the balance of the throne." Clara almost smiled, because even now Vivian could not help turning dignity into a weapon. Before Clara could answer, Alden did. "No," he said. His voice was steady, but there was no softness left in it. "I am admitting that this pack has spent too long confusing rank with worth." The hall went quiet again. Marcus Bell lowered his arms slowly, as if even he had not expected the king to say it that plainly. Alden turned toward the council, then toward the nobles, then toward the staff standing at the edge of the room who had been pretending they did not matter. Clara Whitman did not force this bond, he said. She did not scheme for it, and she did not use it. She stood in this palace while people judged her for being exactly what she is, and she kept her dignity anyway. Clara felt something tight and old loosen in her chest. No speech had ever sounded like that. Not because it was grand, but because it was specific, real, earned. Vivian's mouth tightened. And what if the pack refuses to accept her? She asked. Alden did not look away from her. Then the pack will have to decide whether it is loyal to me or loyal to its own fear. That landed harder than any threat. A few council members shifted in their seats. More than one noble looked suddenly uncertain. The king had not raised his voice. He did not need to. Clara understood then that power did not always mean control. Sometimes it meant choosing what to carry in front of everyone, even when it cost you comfort, approval, and easy alliances. Marcus stepped forward with a thin folder in hand. For the record, he said dryly, the palace account also shows that Miss Whitman has been the only person to keep the king's wolf calm in 3 weeks, corrected 2 veterinary reports, and prevented 1 disastrous ceremonial collapse. So, from an administrative standpoint, she is already doing better than half the council. A few people blinked. One servant looked like they wanted to laugh and were too afraid to admit it. Even Clara let out a small breath. Alden's mouth moved again, almost a smile this time. That will do, Marcus. It was worth saying. Clara looked at Alden then, really looked at him. The king who had spent so long standing above everyone else now seemed most powerful when he was standing beside her without hiding the choice. And when she looked back at the room, she saw it change. Not all at once. Not magically, but enough. Enough for the staff to straighten a little. Enough for the council to lose its certainty. Enough for the pack to understand that an Omega did not lose her value because a throne room tried to overlook her. Vivian gathered herself first, of course, and with one final cool glance, she sat back down. She had not won. Clara had not been handed victory either. What she had been given was something better. Recognition. Alden turned toward her, and in front of everyone, he said, "You will not be asked to stand behind me again." Clara held his gaze, and for a moment the whole room seemed to fall away. She thought about loyalty and how easy it was for people to demand it from others while giving very little in return. She thought about power and how often it tried to dress itself up as tradition. She thought about love, not as a dramatic confession, but as the dangerous decision to tell the truth where everyone could hear it. Clara lifted her chin. "Then do not ask me to shrink," she said. Alden's answer came quietly, but it carried. "I will not." And in that simple promise, the pack finally saw what mattered most. Not a scandal, not a mistake, but a king willing to honor the Omega who had seen the truth before anyone else did. That was the kind of justice people remembered. That was the kind of story they told someone else the next day.